Hey everyone, welcome back to not another Greek history podcast. Today we're going straight to May 29th of 1453 because the day is approaching. It's almost May 29th now of 2025. That was the year when everything changed. That was the year the Turks took Constantinople. Welcome to not another Greek history podcast, the podcast that aims to be exactly what it says. I'm your host, Onouphrios Dovlepis, and together we'll discover the not so frequently told stories of Greece's history that will change the way you view things forever. By 1453, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its old self. It had been shrinking for centuries. By now it was mainly Constantinople and some areas of Greece. Constantinople was the Greek colony of Byzantium, founded in the 8th century BC by the city of Megara, which is really close to Athens. It was renamed by the Emperor Constantine, the one that we call the Great, and it became known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. The emperor in 1453 was another Constantine. He was the 11th from the Paleologos family, born in 1405. He spent much of his life actually far from Constantinople in Peloponnesos and the Peloponnese, which is in southern Greece, very close to the city of Sparta, and there he proved himself as a capable leader, building fortresses and defending territory that was usually under threat. He and his brothers reclaimed nearly all of that region from the French Crusader lords who had held it since the Fourth Crusade, over 2 centuries earlier. He even rebuilt the wall of Hexamilian, which we see when we visit the ancient port of Corinth. When Emperor John VIII, Constantine's elder brother, died without an heir, Constantine became the emperor in 1449, emperor of what was basically just Constantinople and its suburbs. He was crowned at the beautiful medieval city of Mistras, though not in Constantinople. Mistras is roughly 10 minutes away from Sparta. Constantine was a brave guy, but let's be real, he was ruling a ghost ship. The army was really small, and the allies were even smaller. Enter Sultan Mehmed II, only 21 years old, but sharp, ambitious, and ruthless. He had a dream to take over Constantinople and be the next Alexander. He wishes. But only, in this case, he would have used cannons. And not just any cannons. He hired a Hungarian engineer, Urban, to build the biggest one. This monster could fire a 600 kilo stone over a mile. The walls of Constantinople had survived for 1,000 years, but they hadn't met that thing. So the siege begins. On April 6th, the siege kicked off. Around 80,000 Ottoman troops versus maybe 7,000 defenders. But the Byzantines had the walls and the sea. They blocked the Golden Horn with a giant chain. And now here's the big question. Where was the West in all of this? Short answer, busy. England and France were still punching each other in the 100 Years' War. The Holy Roman Empire was arguing with itself. Keep in mind, that's a different Roman Empire. It's nothing to do with the original Roman Empire of antiquity, which included Rome. This was founded by Germans. And that's why, actually, it was not really just called the Roman Empire. It was called the Holy Roman Empire. By the way, for the Nazis, who called themselves the Third Reich, the Third Empire, they considered that one to be the first one. What about the Pope, who should have been interested? That was a Christian state, Byzantium, that was under Muslim attack. There was a last-ditch effort to reunite the Catholic and Orthodox churches, though. A big council, lots of debate, handshakes all around. The Byzantines even accepted Catholic doctrines like the Filioque and Purgatory. But when they got home, the people actually thought we better have the Turks in the city than the Catholics. And now we get to the one ally. Only one Western guy really showed up. That was Giovanni Giustiniani. He was an Italian, Genoese, specifically noble, who was born on the Greek island of Chios, which is in northern Greece. very close to the borders of what is now Turkey. He brought 700 well equipped troops. In exchange, he wanted a command role and probably a slice of the pie if he survived. They gave him the hardest job, defending the land walls, specifically the Gate of Romanos. Spoiler alert, that's where it all went down. While all this was happening, the West was still busy, as we said. Some Venetians and Genoese were in the city, yes, but their home governments didn't do much. They were too afraid to mess up their trade deals with the Ottoman Empire. Some Westerners even sold weapons to the Turks. Business is business. Of course, not just apparently, of course, it's business. And keep in mind, this is what Europe and the United States are still doing to this day, always working with the Turks, selling weapons to the Turks. Weapons that potentially would be used against Greece. The siege lasted 53 days. Constant bombardment, night raids. Ottoman ships were even dragged over land to bypass the chain in the Golden Horn. Inside the city, morale obviously was mixed. The emperor fought side by side with his men. Priests held services, but deep down, people knew this might be it. Then came May 29, the final assault. Early morning, the Ottomans launched everything they had. Waves of attacks, cannons pounding, chaos. Justiniani got seriously wounded. He had to be carried off the battlefield. That broke the defenders, the line collapsed, and the Turks stormed in. Constantine put on his armor, threw off his imperial robes, and joined his soldiers in battle. No fancy escape, no dramatic surrender. When Mehmed offered safe passage and continued rule elsewhere in exchange for the city's surrender, Constantine replied, "To surrender the city to you is beyond my authority or anyone else's who lives in it. For all of us, after taking the mutual decision, shall die out of free will without sparing our lives." They say that he died sword in hand. The last emperor of the Roman Empire, actually, was gone. He was 48 years old. He had married twice, but during his rule, he wasn't married. He hadn't had any children. Constantine XI Palaeologos wasn't just the last Greek emperor of Byzantium, he was the final act in a 1,000-year-old story. Just like Rome had been founded by a Romulus and was lost under another Romulus, Constantinople was also founded by Constantine the Great, as we said, and fell under another one, Constantine XI. Both in Mistras, where he was crowned emperor, and in Athens, you can actually see the statue of the Emperor Constantine XI. The aftermath. The city was looted, churches desecrated. Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, became a mosque. The Eastern Roman Empire, the last link to ancient Rome, was officially over. Some Westerners mourned. The Pope called for a crusade. Nothing happened. Others just shrugged. To them, the Greeks were outdated. So why should we care nowadays? Because this was the end of the medieval world, which actually included Greece. And practically that was really the end of the Roman Empire. The things that nowadays people don't realize that the Roman Empire had split in two parts. The Western one had collapsed by the 5th century, but the Eastern one continued. It just didn't include Rome, ironically. There was a Roman Empire without Rome. But Western Europe didn't really consider them to be Romans. They were not Romans anyway, they were Greek, of course. And to this day, Italians, I think, don't really bother with that part of history. They don't consider that to be Italian history. Imagine this empire is a big deal for us, for the Greeks. The fall of Constantinople marks the start of something new as well. It marked the Ottoman dominance, the rise of new powers. Imagine that practically at some point, the Ottoman Empire reached all the way up to Austria. Of course, it shook Europe as well. Greek scholars fled west, taking manuscripts and knowledge with them. You could say the Renaissance got a little nudge from this disaster. The Renaissance was based on ancient Greek art or Roman art, which was really just a copy of the Greek originals. The Romans were not really known for their originality, after all, anyway. But the Renaissance wasn't only rooted in antiquity. As I read in a really interesting book called The Contribution of Byzantine Art in the Transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance by Diotima Liandini, Italian cities thriving from trade and eager to develop the fine arts went so far as to establish painting schools in the Greek style, like the famous Siena school. This happened, by the way, right after many artists from Constantinople fled to Italy following the Fourth Crusade in 1204. These Greek artists brought their skill and revived an art scene that had become poor and aimless, something that Vasari himself confirms. He wrote about many of the artists that we know to this day when he describes the early career of Cimabue. Not such a well-known, let's say, painter for most people maybe listening right now, but when you study history of art, he's part of that. Because the city's leaders invited some Greek painters to Florence, who were to reignite the extinguished art. That's how also Giotto, a really important painter from 1266, that's when he was born, and he was considered the father of the Renaissance. That's how Giotto ended up being influenced by Greek art. And many Greek books were already making their way to Italy from the early 1400s, even before the final fall of Constantinople. Many Greeks made their way to Italy, such as Chrysoloras, Plithon, Ghazis, Vissarion, Argyropoulos, and Chalkokondylis. You've never heard of these names, but they were quite important. Their libraries, of course, ended up in the hands of Italian nobles. Vissarion, in fact, was nearly elected pope, but internal politics blocked him. But we had many other Greek popes, as we said, but not at that time anymore. Keep in mind that I made a whole episode about the Greek popes, and it's interesting, you should listen to that. He donated his personal library to Venice, which became the foundation for the famous Marciana Library, the Library of Saint Mark. I guess in Italian that would be Biblioteca Marciana. It's also worth pointing out that unlike the rest of Europe, which was going through the Middle Ages, or as they're often called, the Dark Ages, the Greeks weren't. The only real Dark Age for the Greeks came during the Turkish occupation, and we're still paying the price for that to this day. Keep in mind the Turkish occupation is actually what kept Greece cut off from the rest of Europe up to the 1900s, more or less. At the same time in Western Europe, there would have been people such as Copernicus, Galileo, Da Vinci, Christopher Columbus, and all these people. But at the same time in Greece, there was nothing happening because of the Turkish occupation. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, all the way up to the 18th century, Italians and Turks were actually constantly fighting over Greece in Greece. That's how many places were destroyed, and that's how Greece ended up having a lot of medieval, as we say, castles built by the Italians all around Greece. So you can go to places like Nafplio, close to Athens, which we visit sometimes during the tours, which has a very beautiful castle from the 1600s, actually, not even really medieval, but it just doesn't belong there. They destroyed anything ancient that was there. So how did we get from Constantinople to Istanbul? The name Istanbul didn't officially replace Constantinople until the 20th century, so roughly a century ago. The Greeks never stopped calling the city Constantinople, Constantinople, the city of Constantine, as we said. They also casually just called it the city, Polis, because obviously there was no other that was the city. So Istanbul practically is a distortion of the Greek phrase Istimbolin, which means in the city. Like, where do you live? I live in the city, Istimbolin. And Turkish speakers heard that and turned it into Istanbul. It was used informally by locals during the Ottoman period, but not officially. So in 1930, when the modern Turkish Republic was established under Ataturk, he made it official. Istanbul would replace Constantinople in all international use. Mind you, that Turkey is really smart, and that's great for them. I love that they actually try to promote things that have to do with them, or things that they think that have to do with them anyway, because this is not a Turkish name anyway. But for example, recently they managed to impose, let's say, the use of the name Türkiye, which is the word that they use in Turkish for Turkey. And it happened. Now you see, for example, some plates that say, for instance, made in Türkiye. They don't say made in Turkey anymore. So this switch happened because, of course, we had nationalism. They wanted to break also the connection with the Byzantine, the Greek past, and they wanted to assert Turkish identity over a historically Greek city, of course. As a result of the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, which had just happened practically, a part of the Ottoman Empire is briefly assigned to Greece by the Treaty of Sèvres that was signed in France. When that happens, Greek ships even reached Constantinople, and on January 19th of 1919 practically, it's an odd numerical coincidence, a Christian Orthodox service was held at the Hagia Sophia itself for the first time since 1453, when the city fell to the Turks. It is the last one to this day, and the church is currently used as a mosque. According to myth, an angel saved Constantine at the moment of his supposed death, turning him into a marble statue to hide him from the Turks. That statue, the legend says, lies hidden beneath the Golden Gate of Constantinople. There, the last emperor sleeps in enchanted slumber, waiting for the day he will awaken by God's will, retake the city, and restore the empire. So yeah, 1453 was not just another year in history. It was the year the lights went out in Byzantium and the candles started flickering in Florence. Thanks for listening to Not Another Greek History podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share. Until next time, this is Onoufiros Dovletis signing off from Not Another Greek History podcast.